I thought it would just be months of peace and quiet, but I was wrong. I discovered a terrible secret during that time, which changed my life. Let me tell you my story. The advert was a godsend, tucked away in the back pages of a trade magazine I'd picked up from a Greasy Spoon cafe table. More out of boredom than any real hope. 6 months I'd been out of work. 6 months of my savings dwindling like sand through a sieve. 6 months of that special kind of dread that wakes you up at 3 a.m. and whispers sweet nothings about failure in your ear. Caretaker wanted, it read, in stark, no-nonsense block capitals. Historic Lighthouse, Outer Hebrides. Winter season, October to March. Duties include maintenance of automated light, general upkeep. Must be self-sufficient and comfortable with extreme isolation. Excellent remuneration. Those were the magic words. I'd have taken a job wrestling alligators in a sewer for excellent remuneration at that point. I called the number. The voice on the other end was clipped and professional. A man named Mr. Pillman. He didn't ask for much. A few character references I could easily fake, a confirmation I was in good health. He seemed more interested in my psychological fortitude. Could I handle being alone? Truly alone? I prefer it, I'd lied, trying to sound like some rugged, Thoreau-reading mountain man. And not a guy whose main social interaction for the last month had been with the cashier at the local supermarket. The money he quoted was obscene, enough to clear my debts and set me up for a whole year. I didn't question it. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth when you're about to be evicted. The transport arrangements were as strange as the job. A helicopter from a private airfield near Oban. The pilot was a slab of a man, with a face like a clenched fist and the conversational skills of a rock. He grunted a hello, strapped me in, and we were off, thumping our way over the slate-grey, white-capped waters of the Atlantic. From the air, the place was a jagged black tooth jutting from the churning sea. The lighthouse a white needle perched precariously on its highest point. It looked exactly as I'd imagined. Desolate, defiant, utterly alone. As we descended, the wind buffeted the helicopter, and I saw the stone of the lighthouse tower was dark with age and sea spray. Streaked with green, where moss clung to it for dear life. It looked ancient, weathered. A place that had seen 1,000 storms and would see 1,000 more. The pilot set us down on a concrete pad with practiced ease, helped me unload my duffel bags, and handed me a heavy ring of keys. "Pillman will wire the first half of your payment now," he grunted, already climbing back into the cockpit. "The rest when you're done. Supply boat comes once a month. Emergency radios in the kitchen. Don't wander off." And then he was gone. The sound of the rotors fading until it was swallowed by the eternal roar of the waves crashing against the rocks below. The silence that descended wasn't peaceful. It was crushing. It was the sound of true isolation. I turned to the lighthouse, the keys feeling cold and solid in my hand. A thick oak door, banded with iron, stood before me. It looked like it belonged on a medieval castle. I found the right key, turned it in the lock, a satisfying heavy clunk, and pushed it open. I stepped inside and froze. The shock was electric. The ancient storm-battered facade was a lie. A complete and utter deception. The interior wasn't the damp, Spartan keeper's quarters I'd expected. It was a luxury apartment. Polished hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lighting. A spiral staircase of steel and dark wood corkscrewed up the centre of the tower. To my left was a living area with a plush leather sofa, a state-of-the-art television, and shelves groaning with what looked like hundreds of DVDs and books. To my right, a kitchen that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Michelin-starred restaurant, all stainless steel and black granite. A wave of disbelief, followed by giddy relief, washed over me. This wasn't a hardship post. It was a 5-star solitary confinement. I was going to be paid a fortune to live in a luxury penthouse in the middle of the ocean. I laughed, the sound alien in the sudden stillness. I dropped my bags and explored. The bedroom, one level up, had a king-sized bed and an ensuite with a rainfall shower. The top level, the lantern room, was a marvel of glass and brass. The automated light pulsing with a soft, hypnotic rhythm. Below the main living floor was a storage level, and it was a prepper's wet dream. There were freezers full of vacuum-packed steaks and fish, shelves stacked with canned goods, fine wines, and single malt whiskies. It didn't take me long to understand the warning about the cold. The wind howled outside like a banshee, and even through the thick modern windows, I could feel the chill radiating from the stone. This place was built to be sealed up. A warm, luxurious womb against the savagery of the Hebridean winter. And I was its lucky, well-paid fetus. The first month was bliss. I fell into a comfortable routine. In the mornings, I'd run the system checks on the light, a simple task of flicking switches and reading gauges. The rest of the day was mine. I read Conrad and Melville, watched the entire box set of The Sopranos, and cooked elaborate meals for myself. I'd sit on the leather sofa with a glass of whiskey, watching the storms rage, feeling utterly safe and content. The isolation was a warm blanket. No internet and no phone signal. Just me, my books, and the endless sea. It was perfect. By the middle of the second month, the blanket started to feel a little scratchy. The edges of my perfect solitude began to fray. I'd seen every film I had any interest in. I'd reread my favourite books. The novelty of cooking gourmet meals for one had worn off. The constant, unchanging roar of the sea was no longer a comforting backdrop. I started talking to myself. Full-blown conversations. I'd argue with Tony Soprano on the screen. I'd debate the merits of different philosophers with their portraits on the book covers. The silence inside the lighthouse became as loud as the storm outside. Boredom, I discovered, is a truly insidious thing. It's a slow-growing mold that creeps into the corners of your mind. To fight it, I started breaking the pilot's one rule. I started to wander. I'd wait for a lull in the weather, a brief respite when the wind wasn't trying to tear the flesh from my bones, and I'd venture out. I'd give myself an hour, wrapped in every layer of clothing I owned. The island was small, a lump of barren rock and tough, salty grass. There wasn't much to see, but it was something. It was a break from the four walls of my gilded cage. It was on one of these excursions, near the end of November that I found it. On the far side of the island, tucked against a low cliff face and half hidden by a curtain of matted, frozen seagrass, was a door. It was a thick, steel affair, painted grey, but now mostly a patchwork of rust. It was set flush into the rock and secured with a heavy-duty padlock that was almost as corroded as the door itself. A bunker. It had to be. Maybe an old military installation, or a storm shelter for keepers from a bygone era. My heart gave a little flutter of excitement. A mystery. Something new. The sky was already bruising for sunset, and the cold was starting to seep into my bones. So I marked the spot in my mind and trudged back to the warmth of the lighthouse. But the image of the door stayed with me. It was a splinter in my mind. What was behind it? Why was it locked? It gnawed at me through dinner, through another pointless movie, through a restless night of sleep. Curiosity, I learned, is a far more powerful motivator than common sense. The next day, armed with a crowbar from the lighthouse's well-stocked tool shed, I went back. The wind was bitter, flinging icy needles of spray into my face, but I barely noticed. I wedged the end of the crowbar into the shackle of the padlock and put my weight into it. I expected a fight, a screech of tortured metal. Instead, the rusted hasp gave way with a pathetic, crumbly snap. It was almost disappointingly easy. The heavy door groaned open on protesting hinges, revealing a square of perfect, impenetrable darkness. A smell wafted out, dank and earthy. The smell of a place that hadn't breathed fresh air in a very long time. I switched on the heavy-duty torch I'd brought with me. A flight of concrete steps led down. I hesitated for only a moment before descending, the door swinging shut behind me, with a hollow, echoing boom that made my heart jump into my throat. The air was frigid, far colder than outside, and my breath plumed in the torch beam. At the bottom of the steps, a long, narrow corridor stretched out before me, the concrete walls weeping with damp. I walked slowly, my footsteps the only sound. The corridor went on for what felt like 100 yards before I saw doors, set at regular intervals along one wall. They were heavy steel, like the entrance, but with a small, barred slit at eye level. Prison cells. My skin prickled. This was no storm shelter. The first cell was empty, the second too. My light played over bare concrete floors and walls. Then I reached the third. I peered through the bars, and my torch beam fell on a heap of something in the corner. I pushed the door, which was unlocked, and it swung inward. The heap was clothing. Tattered, mouldy rags that looked like they'd been torn from a person in a struggle. A dark, reddish-brown stain, unmistakable even in its age, was spattered across a fragment of what might have been a shirt. This was all wrong. The luxury upstairs, and this medieval horror down here. It didn't make sense. I backed out, my hand trembling slightly. I should have left then. I should have run back to the lighthouse, barred the door, and spent the next 4 months huddled in a corner with a whiskey bottle. But I didn't. I had to see. I had to know. I moved to the next cell. The door was slightly ajar. As I pushed it open, the beam of my torch illuminated scratches on the far wall. Not random marks. They were tally marks. Hundreds of them, gouged into the concrete, arranged in neat little rows of 5. Weeks, months, years. A lifetime of days, counted off in a cold, dark hole. I was standing in a place where someone had withered away. The thought terrified me. I turned to leave, to get out of that cursed place, and my light swept across the floor of the final cell at the end of the corridor. And there it was, half buried in the dirt and grime, pale and unmistakable, was a human skull. The eye sockets were dark, empty voids that seemed to stare right at me, accusingly. I made a sound I'd never made before and stumbled backward. A prison. A private, illegal prison. Who were they? Why were they here? Was it the previous caretakers? The ones who just disappeared? Was this the excellent remuneration package? A few months of luxury, followed by a lifetime in a dungeon. My horror was so absolute, so consuming, that it took me a second to register the other sound. A new sound, cutting through the roar of the sea that was muffled by the tons of rock above me. It sounded familiar. A helicopter. It sounded close, directly overhead. Instinctively, I looked up, sweeping my torch across the damp ceiling of the corridor. And there, nestled between 2 concrete supports, was a small, black, hemispherical dome. A camera. Its tiny lens was pointed directly at me. The realization hit me immediately. I was being watched. I'd always been watched. The story about no internet was a lie. They had everything here. They just didn't want me to have it. This must be some sick experiment, or a game. And I'd just stumbled into the part of the maze they didn't want me to see. As if on cue, I heard a sound from the far end of the corridor. A heavy, grating creak. The sound of the main bunker door opening. Someone was coming in. I was trapped. I scrambled back into the cell with the tally marks. I needed a weapon. My eyes darted around. In the corner, almost hidden in the shadows, was a short length of rusted iron pipe, probably part of an old bunk bed. I grabbed it. It was heavy and solid. It felt pathetically inadequate. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, slow and confident. Not the steps of someone who is exploring. The steps of a guard, a jailer. I flattened myself against the wall beside the cell door. I held the pipe in a white-knuckled grip, trying to control my breathing. The footsteps grew louder as they approached. A figure appeared, silhouetted against the dim light from the entrance. As he drew nearer, my stomach plummeted. I recognized the bulky frame, the determined, stony face. It was the pilot. He stopped just outside the cell, his head turning as he scanned the darkness. He must have seen the open door, the disturbed clothing. He knew I was here. He took a step inside, a powerful torch in his hand. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I swung the pipe with all the adrenaline-fueled strength I possessed. It connected with his shoulder with a sickening, wet crunch. He roared in pain and surprise, stumbling back. The torch flew from his hand. He was on me in a second, a bull-like shape in the dark. His hands closed around my throat, squeezing and lifting me off my feet. My torch fell, its beam pointing uselessly at the ceiling. Stars exploded behind my eyes. I was losing. I was going to die here, in this forgotten hole, and become just another set of bones. I thrashed wildly, bringing the pipe up and jabbing it forward into his side. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I twisted, ducking under his arm, and swung the pipe again, blindly this time. It connected with the side of his head with a horrifying crack. He staggered back, moaning, and slumped against the wall before sliding to the floor. I didn't check to see if he was dead. I scrambled for my torch, grabbed it, and ran. I sprinted down the corridor, my lungs burning, my feet pounding on the concrete. I burst out of the bunker door into the howling, freezing wind, gasping the clean and salt-laced air. My mind was working overtime. I couldn't just run. He might wake up. There might be others. I looked around wildly and saw a pile of rusted chains and equipment near the cliff edge, probably left over from the lighthouse's construction. I grabbed the heaviest chain, looped it through the handles on the bunker door, and secured it with the crowbar, ramming it deep into a fissure in the rock. It was a crude lock, but it would hold for a while. I ran back to the lighthouse, my sanctuary that had become a trap, and slammed the heavy oak door, throwing the bolts. I went straight to the kitchen and found the emergency radio. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely work the controls. I broadcast a mayday, my voice cracking, babbling a story that I can't even remember. I had no idea if anyone could even hear me. I spent the next 6 hours huddled in the lantern room, the highest point, watching the raging sea with the iron pipe clutched in my hands. Every gust of wind, every creak of the old tower sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. I kept expecting to see the pilot emerge from the bunker, to see him coming for me. But he never did. Just before dawn, a Coast Guard helicopter appeared on the horizon. I've never known a relief so profound. They flew me to a hospital in Stornoway. I was checked over and discharged the next day. A wire transfer appeared in my account, the second half of my payment. Hush money. I'm not ashamed to say that I took it. I took it and I vanished. I moved to a small, anonymous town in the north of England, rented a room under a false name, and paid for everything in cash. For months, I lived in a state of constant, gnawing paranoia. Every time a helicopter flew overhead, my blood would turn to ice. I jumped at shadows. I dreamt of empty eye sockets and tally marks on a concrete wall. I didn't know if the pilot had died in that bunker, if he'd been rescued, or if Mr. Pillman and his shadowy employers were looking for me. Slowly, very slowly, the terror began to recede, replaced by a dull, constant ache of memory. I started to think I might have gotten away with it. I started to think I might one day be able to sleep through the night again. Then, yesterday, I was at a cafe again, trying to feel normal. Trying to reconnect with a world I no longer felt a part of. I picked up a newspaper and idly flipped through the jobs section. My eye spotted something. It was a small ad, tucked in the bottom corner of the page, easily missed. But the words leaped out at me as if they were printed in blood. Caretaker wanted for historic lighthouse. Secluded location. Excellent remuneration. My heart stopped. They were looking again. The trap was being reset. They'd cleaned up the mess, disposed of the evidence, and were casting their line back into the water, waiting for another desperate, lonely fish to bite. And I realized, with a certainty that chilled me to the very marrow of my bones, that I hadn't escaped anything. I was just the one that got away. For now. They know I'm out here. And I know that sooner or later, they're going to want their story back.